Before Meghan Markle became the Duchess of Sussex, before her name was permanently attached to Prince Harry, before newspapers began debating her every gesture, and before the phrase, royal family, became inseparable from her identity, she was living a life that was, by royal standards, remarkably ordinary. She had a career. She had friends. She had ambitions. She had failures. She had successes. And most importantly, she had an identity that existed independently of the British monarchy. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. That is important because when people look back at Meghan's royal story, it can sometimes feel as though her entire life began the moment she met Harry. It didn't. There was a Meghan Markle long before there was a Duchess of Sussex. And understanding that woman is essential to understanding what happened when she eventually walked into the royal family. Because she did not enter that institution as someone who had spent her entire childhood preparing for royal life. She was not raised inside the British aristocracy. She was not trained from birth to understand palace protocol. She was not born knowing which royal residence was private, which was official, which family member took precedence at a ceremony, or what it meant to spend your life being watched by the public. She came from somewhere else. And perhaps that difference explains more about the eventual tensions surrounding her than any dramatic palace rumor ever could. Meghan was born in Los Angeles in 1981. Her childhood was shaped by American life, not British royal tradition. Her father, Thomas Markle, worked in television production, including as a lighting director and director of photography. Her mother, Doria Ragland, worked in social services and had her own professional interests. Meghan grew up around the entertainment industry, but she was not born into Hollywood royalty. There was no royal title waiting for her. There was no palace. There was no crown. There was no expectation that one day she would marry into the British monarchy. Instead, she developed an interest in acting and eventually pursued a career in the entertainment industry. For years, she worked toward establishing herself professionally. There were smaller roles, auditions, setbacks, opportunities. And eventually, the role that brought her widespread recognition. Rachel Zane on the television series Suits. To audiences who knew her from the show, Meghan was an actress. Not a princess. Not a duchess. Not a future member of the House of Windsor. Just an actress building a career. And that distinction matters because her eventual entrance into the royal family represented an extraordinary transformation. Imagine spending years trying to convince people that you are good enough for a role. Then imagine suddenly becoming famous for an entirely different reason. Your career becomes secondary. Your personal life becomes public property. Your relationship becomes international news. Your clothes become headlines. Your family becomes part of the conversation. And eventually, your name is associated with one of the world's oldest monarchies. That is the world Meghan entered. But there was another side to her life before Harry. Meghan had already developed an interest in humanitarian work. She had written and spoken about gender equality. She had worked with charitable organizations. She had traveled internationally. She had been involved in campaigns and causes before becoming royal. That background became important after her marriage because some people saw her as a modernizing influence within the monarchy. Others believed her approach was incompatible with the institution's traditional expectations. And eventually, both interpretations would become part of the public debate. But in the beginning, none of that mattered. There was simply a woman whose life was about to intersect with a prince. The exact circumstances of how Meghan and Harry first connected have been discussed publicly many times, with the couple explaining that they were introduced through a mutual friend. Their relationship developed relatively quickly. And once it became public, the interest was immediate. The British press wanted to know who she was. American media wanted to know who he was. Royal watchers wanted to know whether the relationship was serious. And ordinary people around the world were fascinated by the possibility that Prince Harry had fallen in love with an American actress. There was something almost cinematic about it. A prince. An actress. Two countries. A royal family. A relationship crossing social and cultural boundaries. But underneath the fairy tale imagery was a difficult reality. Harry was not simply a wealthy young man. He was a senior member of one of the world's most famous families. His grandmother was Queen Elizabeth II. His father was the Prince of Wales. His brother was second in line to the throne. His life had been shaped by royal duty from birth. And that meant anyone who married him would also be entering a highly unusual environment. Meghan could not simply become Harry's wife and continue living exactly as she had before. At least, not if the couple intended to work within the monarchy. There would be security. There would be public appearances. There would be official engagements. There would be protocol. There would be staff. There would be advisors. There would be enormous media attention. And there would be expectations about how Meghan should behave. This is where the fairy tale begins to become more complicated. Because people often imagine royal life as freedom. Imagine the palaces, the beautiful clothes, the ceremonies, the travel, the famous guests, the historical significance. But royal life is also restriction. Your schedule is not entirely your own. Your privacy is limited. Your mistakes can become international news. Your relationships can become subjects of political and social discussion. Even your facial expressions can be analyzed. Imagine being photographed at a public event and then reading the next morning that your expression supposedly revealed how you felt about another member of your family. Imagine smiling at the wrong moment. Imagine looking tired. Imagine standing too far away from someone. In ordinary life, none of these things would matter. Inside the monarchy, they can become headlines. And Meghan was entering that environment with a background that had not prepared her for the scale of that scrutiny. That does not mean she was incapable of handling it. It means the environment itself was unusual. Harry knew that world because he had been born into it. Meghan did not. That difference would become one of the most important themes of their story. When Harry and Meghan announced their engagement in 2017, the reaction was enormous. The couple appeared together for interviews. They discussed their relationship. They talked about their future. And Meghan spoke openly about the excitement and challenges of joining the royal family. The engagement also carried enormous symbolic importance. Meghan was American. She was biracial. She was divorced. She had built a career before entering royal life. She was older than some previous royal brides. And she was not from the British aristocracy. In a rapidly changing Britain, her arrival appeared to symbolize a monarchy attempting to reflect a more diverse modern society. For supporters, that was exciting. For traditionalists, it represented a significant departure from the past. And for the media, it was irresistible. Every aspect of Meghan's identity became part of the story. Her mother attracted attention. Her father attracted attention. Her half-siblings attracted attention. Her former husband attracted attention. Her career attracted attention. Even her childhood became material for headlines. The scrutiny was intense before she had even become a member of the royal family. Then came the wedding. May 19, 2018. Windsor Castle. St. George's Chapel. Millions watched. Meghan walked into the chapel and became part of one of the world's most recognizable institutions. And when she walked out, she was no longer simply Meghan Markle. She was the Duchess of Sussex. That title represented a dramatic change. But it also carried a responsibility that was easy to underestimate. A royal title is not simply an elegant label. It can function as an identifier within a hierarchy. It can indicate rank. It can reflect a marriage. It can be connected to a peerage. And in Meghan's case, it became part of the public identity she carried alongside Harry. The wedding itself was widely praised as a celebration of modern Britain. There were moments that seemed to symbolize change. Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland, was the only member of her immediate family from her side to attend the ceremony, and her presence attracted enormous attention. The service incorporated elements that felt distinctive from previous royal weddings. The atmosphere was celebratory. The couple looked happy. And for a brief moment, it seemed possible that Harry and Meghan might become one of the monarchy's strongest modern partnerships. They were young. They were globally recognizable. They appealed to audiences outside Britain. They were comfortable with modern media. And Meghan had already developed a reputation for speaking about causes that mattered to her. The institution had gained a new member who could potentially connect the monarchy to audiences it had struggled to reach. But expectations can become burdens. Once the wedding was over, the fairy tale had to become a working arrangement. And that meant Meghan had to learn how the royal system actually operated. The difference between a private engagement and an official engagement. The difference between speaking personally and speaking on behalf of the crown. The difference between a charity initiative and an official royal patronage. The difference between what can be said privately and what can be said publicly. These distinctions may appear obvious to someone raised inside the institution. For someone entering from outside, they can take time to understand. And there was another complication. The media. Harry had already developed a complicated relationship with the British press. His mother, Diana, had been relentlessly pursued by photographers. Her death in Paris in 1997 remained one of the defining tragedies of Harry's life. He grew up believing that media intrusion had caused enormous suffering within his family. So when Meghan began experiencing intense press attention, Harry was not approaching the issue like someone encountering it for the first time. He was approaching it with decades of personal history. That made the subject emotionally charged. From Harry's perspective, protecting Meghan from excessive media intrusion was not simply about public relations. It was connected to memories of his mother. It was connected to his own childhood. And it was connected to his fear that history might repeat itself. Meghan, meanwhile, was suddenly experiencing a level of attention that few people outside the royal family could comprehend. Her every move was photographed. Her family circumstances were analyzed. Her relationship with other royals became a topic of discussion. And eventually, stories about tension inside the family began appearing. Some reports were disputed, some were defended, some were later addressed directly by Harry and Meghan. And some remained unresolved. This is where it becomes important to resist simplistic storytelling. It is tempting to look back and say, this was the moment everything fell apart. But history rarely works that neatly. Relationships inside families evolve. People misunderstand one another. Media reports can intensify disagreements. Private conversations can be interpreted differently by different people. And public pressure can make ordinary family problems feel enormous. The Sussex story was no exception. There were genuine moments of warmth. There were public appearances where Harry and Meghan appeared happy. There were moments where they seemed closely connected to the wider royal family. There were also signs of increasing independence. Their household began developing its own identity. Their public projects became more distinct. And gradually, the question emerged. Were Harry and Meghan going to remain conventional working royals? Or were they going to build something different? That question became more urgent after the birth of their son, Archie, in 2019. For Harry and Meghan, becoming parents introduced another dimension to their lives. They were no longer simply deciding what was best for themselves. They were deciding what kind of environment they wanted for their child. And that would eventually become central to their decision to step back from royal duties. But before that happened, there was another issue that cannot be ignored. Privacy. For Meghan, privacy became one of the most important themes of her public story. She wanted boundaries around her personal life. Harry wanted protection from intrusive media. But the monarchy itself is built around public visibility. Working royals exist because they represent the crown publicly. Their schedules are public. Their engagements are public. Their photographs are public. Their words can carry significance. Their personal choices can influence perceptions of the institution. That creates a natural tension. How much privacy can a working royal realistically have? And what happens when someone believes the institution is not doing enough to protect that privacy? These questions would eventually become central to the Sussexes' decision to leave. But at the beginning, there was still hope. Harry and Meghan continued their duties. They undertook tours. They attended events. They appeared together. And they developed an international profile that was sometimes larger than that of other members of the royal family. Their 2019 tour of South Africa was particularly significant. They visited communities. They met young people. They discussed issues that mattered to them. Meghan appeared comfortable speaking about social issues. Harry continued his long-standing work with causes including mental health and veterans. To many observers, the couple looked like a modern royal team. But beneath the public appearances, questions about their relationship with the institution were becoming increasingly difficult. Were they comfortable with the restrictions? Were they satisfied with their media treatment? Did they feel supported? Did they believe they could change the institution from within? Or did they increasingly believe that the only way to protect their family was to step outside it? Those questions would eventually lead to a decision that shocked the monarchy. But the seeds of that decision were planted long before the announcement. And this matters when examining the later controversy surrounding Meghan's title. Because her title became a symbol of the contradiction at the center of the Sussex story. Meghan wanted distance from the machinery of royal life. But her identity remained connected to it. She and Harry wanted greater independence. But their titles remained part of their names. They wanted privacy. But their royal status guaranteed global attention. They wanted to create their own projects. But the public remained fascinated by their connection to the crown. It was almost impossible to separate the two worlds completely. And then there was Harry. Harry was born into the monarchy. He understood that titles could carry enormous meaning. He had spent his entire life being introduced as Prince Harry. His identity was inseparable from the institution. When he married Meghan, their identities became intertwined. He became Duke of Sussex. She became Duchess of Sussex. And together they represented a new branch of the royal family. But eventually, that branch would begin moving away from the tree. That is what makes the later title debate so emotionally complicated. If Meghan and Harry had remained working royals, there would have been little reason for anyone to question the continued use of their titles. But once they stepped away, the public began asking what the titles meant. Were they simply family titles? Were they symbols of active service? Could someone leave royal duties and still remain a duke or duchess? The answers are not as straightforward as social media arguments often suggest. And this is where the story begins moving toward the moment that changed everything. January 2020. Harry and Meghan announced that they intended to step back as senior members of the royal family. The statement created a storm. The phrase, financially independent, became especially important. The couple wanted to divide their time between Britain and North America. They wanted a different kind of life. They wanted to work. They wanted greater independence. They wanted to raise their family differently. But the monarchy had to respond.